Hey Anime Stark fam. We're back with part 2 of What If Deku and the Dragon. You guys loved the first part, so let's dive right into more epic anime scenarios. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe for more What If adventures. Let's roll. You're not going to be alone with him, I'm going with you, asserted the assertive and straightforward Ryukyu with a tone that brooked no argument. However, Nehire, who was so drunk, didn't pay attention to the meaning of such a declaration and celebrated merrily. He Tatsuma-san? Asked Izuku nervously and surprised, looking at the woman beside him. The blonde lifted her head to look at the taller man and placed her hand on his chest, leaning against him. I don't want to hear complaints, Midoriya, she whispered in a sensual tone, sending shivers down his spine and making him swallow heavily as his blush deepened. Doesn't he have any other choice? After taking a taxi, the three of them arrived after a while at the apartment complex where Deku and Nehire-chan lived together. After dealing with a dizzy Nehire, who threatened to vomit in the elevator, Izuku finally opened the apartment door and entered with Nehire leaning on him since she couldn't walk without stumbling. Ryuko, on the other hand, didn't have the same problem and followed them surprisingly without saying much. Throughout the journey, she refrained from chatting and instead stared intently as Izuku kindly took care of Nehire in the taxi, even though the dazed bluish girl didn't make it easy as she occasionally tried to kiss him. Izuku opened a door in the hallway and entered with Nehire without turning on the light, guiding her to bed carefully and making her lie down with little opposition on her part. Now you can sleep, Nehire, Izuku said softly to his friend with a smile as he covered her body with a sheet. I don't want, Nehire replied in a last effort to stay awake, but a yawn followed, her eyelids felt heavy, and after gentle pats from Izuku on her head, she was already asleep. Seeing her breathe softly with a peaceful face, he smiled. Good night, he wished before heading towards the partially open door and stepping out into the hallway where Ryuko had been waiting in silence. Once he closed the door to Nehire's room, the young hero focused his attention on the beautiful woman in front of him. If you want, you can sleep in my room, Tatsuma-san. I'll sleep on the sofa, Izuku calmly suggested, pointing to the door down the hallway where his room was. After a few seconds of silence, Ryuko raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? The night is still young, Midoriya, she insisted, reluctant to rest. With a smile, she made her way to the living room and then to the kitchen, while Izuku followed, unsure of how to handle the situation and convince her to rest. Don't you have any whiskey or beer around here? She asked, slightly flushed from alcohol, searching the fridge and pantry. Izuku approached and closed the cabinets she had opened, trying to stop her. I think you've had enough, Tatsuma-san, he patiently told the off-duty professional hero, hoping to reason with her. However, Ryuko smiled to herself before placing a finger on the boy's chest. Just do what your elders say, don't be boring, she scolded playfully, getting closer to the nervous young man, who retreated to preserve his personal space. At that moment, Ryuko spotted a cabinet in the kitchen that she hadn't checked. Opening it, she found what she was looking for. Aha, she exclaimed triumphantly, pulling out a bottle of wine with 3/4 of its content. I knew Nehire had something hidden here, she said with a smile before her eyes fixed on the green-haired boy. Or is it yours? She asked with a hint of mischief, making him even more uneasy. He rubbed the back of his neck, shyly looking away. I only open it when there's something to celebrate, he replied, slightly embarrassed, much to the amusement of the woman who couldn't help but chuckle at the contrast between the confident man in front of her and the cinnamon roll he was on the inside. Then what better time than now? Ryuko asked rhetorically with a charming smile, taking 2 glass cups and leading the young man to the living room, where she pushed him onto the sofa before sitting next to him. What are we celebrating? Izuku asked, genuinely confused by the bold woman's proposition. Is it perhaps his birthday? Ryuko effortlessly uncorked the bottle and began pouring its contents into the 2 glasses placed on the table. That you're seducing me, she replied, winking at the green-haired boy, who, after a few seconds of silence, blushed intensely from his ears. Seducing? Deku almost shouted, stiffening his body, his heart racing. Ryuko smiled slightly, holding her glass and crossing her legs. You're very obvious. Bring me to your house, offer me your bed, give me wine. Only candles are missing, she teased, enjoying twisting the reality of things to embarrass the green-haired boy, which seemed to work. That's not my intention, Tatsuma-san. He replied awkwardly, shaking his hands in a lamentable attempt to clarify a misunderstanding that was intentionally created by the dragon hero. I think I would at least like to invite you on a date first, he whispered, now with a lower tone than before, bowing his head shyly with an adorable blush on his freckled face. The woman felt strangely pleased to hear him say that, and it reflected in her expression. "You're giving yourself away," Ryuko said with a beautiful smile as she handed the boy his glass of wine. "So relax, Midoriya, tonight is far from over for both of us. Just go with the flow," she encouraged him to relax, tentatively reducing the distance between them and inviting him to let go. He hesitated, evident during the first few seconds as he alternated his gaze between her and the glass in his hand. But apparently, something made him throw caution to the wind as he brought the glass to his lips and took a deep sip of the reddish liquid. She smiled, pleased, doing the same, determined to claim her fair share of Deku tonight. If Nehire can have him, then so can she, and she would make sure they both had a good time. Her palm met her forehead forcefully as she now could remember everything clearly. She cursed herself for all the things she said and did when she was drunk, leading to this disastrous outcome. Damn, things like this are why she drinks in moderation all the time. Why didn't she do it again yesterday? Why the hell is she so stupid and impulsive when she's drunk? Now, because of her carelessness, she finds herself in this awkward moment with Midoriya, who, judging by his expression, seemed disheartened to a level she can't comprehend. "I'm sorry, Ryu." "Tatsuma-san," Izuku apologized, addressing her again by her last name as if it were difficult for him, looking directly into her eyes. "I should have kept my composure and controlled myself, but because of my weakness, I did something inappropriate last night. I'm really sorry," he blamed himself, visibly upset, clenching his fists and lowering his head. She didn't like that he blamed himself for a mistake she made, she really didn't like it. "It's not your fault, Midoriya. Alcohol has that influence on me. It was my fault for not anticipating that something like this would happen," she said with more calmness, but the seriousness in her eyes was not reassuring. "However it happened, what we did last night was wrong, so we won't mention it anymore, okay?" she told Izuku with severity. He tried to protest, but she didn't allow it as she looked away. "It was just a mistake, so there's no need to dwell on what we both said," she closed her eyes and made a disgusted face at herself. "I like you, Ryuko-san." Those words warmed her chest and made her feel strangely happy, but she couldn't accept them. She can't, not when at the moment she received them, she was betraying the trust of the cheerful and amazing girl she considers her younger sister, not when she slept with the guy Nehire is in love with. Izuku felt a stab in his chest and with a grimace on his face, he re-signed with noticeable disappointment before looking away. "Okay," the young green-haired man agreed with a subdued tone in his voice, unfortunately not ignored by Ryuko, who wanted to cheer him up but had to be firm in this situation. She sighed and wearily picked up her black panties from the floor, looking for the missing part of her underwear set. "Do you know where my bra is? I have to leave before Nehire finds us," she asked Deku, hoping he would help her with that and she could leave before the blue-haired girl woke up, which is most likely. Despite being disheartened, Izuku blushed slightly as he pointed upwards. There, he pointed to the ceiling fan where the black bra of the dragon heroine was hanging from one of the blades. Ryuko contained her embarrassment in favor of maintaining composure. Without needing her to ask, the green-haired boy used a small black whip to grab and pull the bra into his hand, handing it to her before turning away to gather his own clothes, something Ryuko appreciated since she could dress without worrying about him spying. Although it doesn't matter much when he saw her last night as she came into the world. After a while, they were both dressed, Ryuko in the same clothes she came in while Izuku had put on a white shirt and loose dark pajama overalls for home. After Izuku gave her a glass of water and some pills to help with the hangover, he accompanied her to the exit and opened the door. Once she crossed the threshold and was outside, she turned to look at the boy who still seemed disheartened with his dull green eyes. "Again, I'm sorry for what I did, Tatsuma-san." It was the 10th time she apologized, and she genuinely felt bad seeing him like this. She placed a hesitant hand on his shoulder. "I told you it wasn't your fault, Midoriya," she tried to cheer him up with a small smile. "But from now on, act like it never happened and never tell Nehire, please," she asked as kindly as possible, as her priority is to leave the matter in the past, and both could move forward without things getting awkward. Only this way would Nehire never find out what happened, and she could be happy with Deku as she should be. "Fine," Izuku responded emotionlessly in his voice. It broke her heart, but she forced herself to be strong and not continue making him suffer. With a nod, she said goodbye and went towards the elevator. Hearing the door close behind her, she felt her chest squeeze, but as best she could, she ignored it and continued on her way. She feels like this could have ended differently, there probably was a better way to settle the matter with Midoriya, but she really doesn't know it. Therefore, she must resign herself to dealing with the consequences of her actions and the weight of guilt on her conscience. But she will still try to talk normally the next time she sees Deku. She can't let their relationship, which was pleasant until yesterday, crumble because of one night of pleasure with a lot of alcohol involved. She wouldn't allow it. Her laments escaped her lips as a sigh, while her own conscience kept reminding her of the origin of her unease during the last month. The last weeks have been complicated for her, not professionally but emotionally speaking. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she had a very poor result in fixing things with Deku. For the last month, she hasn't had the opportunity to speak to him properly. Since that night, she has only seen him in the middle of an operation or a public disturbance, and once each conflict was over, she sought him out only to find out from other heroes that he had already left. She also thought about contacting him through Nehire, but that avenue was rejected due to the implications of asking the blue-haired girl for help with a problem she caused herself and therefore must solve. Yet, in a whole month, she has achieved nothing. It has been frustrating, incredibly frustrating, but above the anger was a bitter pressure in her chest that has been haunting her all this time, growing and growing every day, even to the point of pain when the thought that Deku is avoiding her settles in her mind. She shook her head to get rid of those personal thoughts. If she delves deeper into them, she might come to the conclusion she's been avoiding for a long time. Admitting it would make everything worse and more complicated. She doesn't know how well she can handle the situation if she admits that. The growing sound from her computer caught her attention, giving her a rope to escape from her thoughts. Gratefully, she accepted it, heading to her desk after pouring a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner of her office. She took a seat and settled to watch the broadcast of the important event happening today, the update of the Hero Billboard chart JP, the top 10 pro heroes in the country. The on-screen images showed the grand auditorium from different angles. A large crowd sat in the external stands, while in the central stands in front of the stage, there was a gathering of invited heroes. She chose not to attend this time, preferring to stay in her office to complete her agency paperwork in these last few days. After finishing her work early, she saw the opportunity to watch the event comfortably from her office computer. With a good cup of coffee in hand, she arrived in time to see the opening of the event. Frankly, everything was quite similar to the last Hero Billboard. The speech about peace being maintained by the effort and sacrifice of all heroes, some comments from journalists covering the event, and finally, the presentation of the top 10 heroes to go on stage. A genuine smile appeared on her face when Nehire-chan was announced as the 10th hero. The cheerful Nehire waved to the applauding crowd. "Thank you all," Nehire exclaimed, smiling and energetic, before flying to the stage where she joined the host who continued with the presentations. Some names of veteran professionals disappeared from the top 10, while relatively new heroes climbed higher. She, for example, dropped to the 8th position as Lemillion took the 7th spot, normal given his growing popularity with numerous cases solved since he regained his quirk a couple of years ago. Lemillion, a hero who saved a million people, Sir Nightai would be proud of his protege. Now we finally reached the top 3 of the list. Her attention turned back to the host, who with her voice managed to excite the audience. The woman stood in front of the stage, holding the microphone with both hands, while large screens showed pictures of him. Many have continued to be amazed by his incredible and numerous feats since his debut. Everyone knows him from his time at UA, and he continues to do a great job as a professional. Her voice conveyed excitement, accompanying the growing roar of the excited audience who still remembered his performance in Osaka. His approval rating has skyrocketed, surpassing hundreds of professionals to land at number 3, the hero with multiple quirks, the young man making his way into our hearts, the hero Deku, the woman roared excitedly, causing a burst of emotion before opening her arms toward a door beside the stage where the spotlights pointed. After almost a minute of uncomfortable silence with everyone watching the door from which the green-haired hero did not emerge, a beep sounded from the host's earpiece. She made a severe face while listening. "Hold on, we are informed that Deku couldn't attend today due to..." "What?" Her calm and professional tone abruptly broke when her surprise was visible to all cameras. Whatever they told her shocked her, her eyes were wide open, and her mouth opened and closed slowly as she turned to the spectators awaiting answers. It seems that 2 days ago, Deku officially joined Ultimate Heroes Agency, the most famous hero agency in America. The moment she heard those words, Ryukyu felt the world pulsate, and the sound of something breaking. "What? That stupid Deku left?" Bakugo shouted from somewhere in the audience, standing up violently with noticeable anger and bewilderment at the news. "Calm down, Bakugo," Red Riot urged his friend, while other professionals held the explosive hero's arms to prevent him from causing a disturbance. A tsunami of whispers echoed throughout the auditorium, and the event barely continued. But all of that faded into the background for her, who no longer heard anything. The coffee cup she was drinking from shattered on the floor, but her hands remained where she lost strength in her fingers and let it fall. She couldn't think clearly, it seemed like her world was turning upside down, and a burning sensation emanated from her chest, with a growing bitterness threatening to crawl beneath her skin. She had no words, none that could help her at least. It's not like saying something now could change what she just heard. Deku left Japan. It's not really surprising considering that since his debut, he has been sought after by several foreign agencies due to his fresh and reliable image, aside from his immense strength. Many see him as the next All Might. Him moving to America is quite beneficial for his career as a pro hero. She should be happy for him. But he left. Those sad words cursed her own existence as they faded into the sepulchral silence of the office. She should be happy for Deku, she really wants to. But how could she? How could this pain in her chest mean happiness when it hurts so much? Even her own body rejects the reality that whether she likes it or not is happening, and she has to accept it. He left. And deep within her, a fear twists that she tries so hard to suppress, one she doesn't want to acknowledge or hear, yet it's there, whispering incessantly. I won't see him again. Strange. When did her tears start flowing? Time passed, rainy and sunny days, quiet mornings and noisy nights, peaceful minutes and chaotic hours, things began, and others ended. The world kept turning, and the gears of time never stopped. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, aging into a year, marking its transitions through the constant and natural change of the seasons. And so, winter came again. Gray clouds covered the skies, sheltering the earth from the sunlight as cold, white tears descended through the air currents. The holidays were approaching, and even the streets and the busiest centers were already bursting with Christmas decorations in anticipation of Christmas Eve. People, as expected, were already buying their preparations for the upcoming date, and therefore, commercial areas were the most crowded these last few days. On the snowy streets where accumulated snow is visible, a beautiful woman walks, breathing warm air into her red gloves to generate heat. She wears brown boots, blue pants, a beige turtleneck sweater, a thick brown coat on top, a red scarf around her neck, and a black wool hat on her head. Her straight, blonde hair falls almost to touch her shoulders, and her sharp yet gentle yellow eyes wander her attention around, watching people move from side to side with smiles on their faces. Appreciating a peaceful scene for a change is comforting for her. She has put her neck on the line to keep it that way, well, her and all the other pro heroes, not only in Japan but also the professionals from outside. And always one, in particular, invades her mind when she thinks of a committed hero working for others. A muted sigh escaped her lips as she continued her path with her hands in the pockets of her coat. It's been about 2.5 years since Deku left the country. Wow, time has been really a bipolar bastard to her. When she looks back, it seems as if everything happened in a blink. It's almost unreal how quickly the months seem to have passed since that day years ago when his move to the United States was announced. Yet everything is far from the truth, very far. She wouldn't deny it, the first few weeks were awful for her. She felt numb, regretful, confused, and depressed. Even her parents, who came to visit for her birthday, were concerned, even though she tried to hide her discomfort as best as possible. Of course, her feelings didn't affect her performance as a hero. She is mature enough to keep her private life separate from her work, but it was still pretty tough. Deku, Izuku Midoriya, had left, and she never had the chance to fix things between them. That's something that weighs on her conscience even today, but life goes on, and she couldn't stay lamenting when she could channel that energy into saving others, just as he does across the ocean. And boy, has she been doing it. Something ethereal at first glance but tangible in reality has been happening worldwide. Something was forming or, rather, recovering at an accelerated pace. Everyone noticed it to a greater or lesser extent, but undoubtedly the change is there, and it's impossible to ignore. The era of peace led by All Might was returning, not only to Japan but gaining strength worldwide. Crime in the country was decreasing by an approximate 2% each month, which could be attributed, to some extent, to the diligent work of Japanese heroes who strive every day. But almost everyone knows that this decline in crime is also due to a certain green-haired hero on the other side of the world. Deku. Not exaggerating, thanks to his help, crime in America has dropped by 35%. Not content with that, his name caused more commotion when he started traveling to South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Austria to play his role as a hero and help in any situation where he is needed. The crime rate in those regions has been decreasing due to the growing influence of the Japanese-American hero who officially resides in NY when not traveling. Continued unparalleled feats and achievements around the globe bore the mark of Hero Deku, who with his multiple quirks saved everyone with a smile, that damn dazzling smile, always prioritizing people above all. Seriously, he is incredible, making a name for himself globally with his presence, encouraging the growing increase of professional heroes and minimizing the appearances of villains. Many could say that he became the #1 pro hero outside of Japan, given the widespread acceptance he receives from the masses. And as extravagant as it sounds, even though he is not in Japan, he has remained in the 10th position on the Hero Billboard chart JP because his approval rating has kept him there. It's undeniable that despite leaving his home country, he is still admired by people as the hero who improves the world. Deku is slowly achieving what All Might always wanted, to make a world where everyone can smile. He is becoming a symbol, not one of peace but of hope, hope for a future, a better tomorrow. The symbol of hope, Deku. That suits him well, she thought with a small smile adorning her lips as she walked across a square to enter a shopping center. She didn't really come with a specific reason, she just thought that staying at home watching TV would be unproductive, and at least here, she could stroll and appreciate how everything was decorated with the typical Christmas spirit of these days. She would go to her office at her agency if her employees hadn't forbidden her from going since she had been working too much during the last week. Once inside, she just wandered aimlessly, thankful that no one around her paid enough attention to identify her as the hero Ryukyu. It's worth mentioning that she doesn't hate attending to her fans, however, there are moments where on her days off, she just wants to be Ryuko Tatsuma, just herself. Look, Mom, I'm like Deku. She turned to see a little boy in front of a store with his mother, excitedly showing the woman the long white cape she had just bought him. You're almost identical, the mother praised her son with a gentle smile, and the boy continued excitedly with the accessory on his back. Ryuko smiled, touched by the scene and amused to herself as she remembered how Deku, shortly after leaving, added a white cape to his costume, something very American, something that All Might also imitated in his golden days but looked better on Deku, who has the ability to fly. Unintentionally, she sighed again, finding herself thinking about him once more. Although she wishes it weren't so, she can't help it. It's something she has no control over, and she has really tried to fight against it, but she never wins against what rests inside her chest and responds to his name. A scream a few meters ahead caught her attention toward a store from which a man rushed out hastily with some items in his arms, his elbows carrying copper blades. Someone stop that man, shouted the alarmed store owner who came out seconds later, pointing his finger at the alleged thief who was making his escape. Move away, she exclaimed, instantly switching to her heroine mode and running to chase the thief. She couldn't transform into a dragon here with so many civilians around. Following the man pushing anyone in his way, she saw the thief nearing the exit with no guard in sight. Nevertheless, she planned to catch him outside. But before that could happen, the thief was abruptly stopped by a tall, muscular man at least 1.90 meters tall. He effortlessly held the thief by the shoulder. It seems you're escaping after committing a robbery, said the man with dark glasses and a cap, his smile friendly. He was there to calm the situation while preventing the thief from escaping. Let go of me, you bastard, yelled the angry criminal, wielding blades on his elbows. Anticipating the move, the man grabbed him by the neck, lifting him almost to eye level with ease. The abrupt movement caused the cap on his head to fall off. At that moment, everyone saw him. The mysterious man placed a finger on his lips. Shh, there are kids around. You wouldn't want me to silence you in front of them, he said with an intimidating tone behind his friendly expression, gesturing towards the surprised onlookers, leaving Ryuko speechless. Those green curls, no. It can't be. Bad luck for you, you know why? The man's smile widened as he took off his dark glasses and pointed with his thumb. Because I'm here, exclaimed a radiant Izuku, confidently and authoritatively, making several feel subdued in his presence. The thief opened his eyes in panic, losing all strength as he realized he wouldn't get away with Deku present. Ryuko had her mouth open, unable to process the revelation when he stood in front of her after such a long time. Dressed in black boots, dark pants, a tight white shirt, and a black long-tailed coat open in the middle, with a green scarf around his neck falling forward. The man standing there was even taller than before, more imposing and stronger, and undoubtedly more handsome. Her cheeks warmed unavoidably. The once handsome young adult now looked like a full-fledged man, exuding confidence, mature air, and even his new haircut supported his point. Trimmed on the sides to highlight the massive green curls on top. If she compared the Izuku from years ago to the one she saw now, he was not only stronger but more mature and experienced. And finally, the information clicked in her head. It's true, the man in front is none other than Deku, shouted most of the excited civilians, celebrating and applauding at the return of the hero Deku in Japanese soil. The noise was deafening as people not only were thrilled but also started taking photos and calling everyone they knew to share the news with noticeable enthusiasm. They found the symbol of hope, Deku. In the midst of all the commotion, Izuku scratched the back of his head with a playful smile. I didn't expect to be recognized so soon. What gave me away? Jovially asked the friendly green-haired man, causing an even bigger surge of excitement among his fans. Undoubtedly, it's Deku, and even though she sees him in front of her eyes, she can't move her legs to bridge the distance between them. The shock of seeing him after so long. Seeing him after what happened that night. The mall guards and several police officers had to make an effort to break through the crowd of excited civilians to reach the famous and conglomerate hero holding the thief by the shoulder in case he tried to escape, though it was unnecessary. The criminal seemed deflated after losing any chance of escape. The green-eyed man looked at the nervous uniformed officers approaching him and smiled, as only he could. Officers, please, he said, gently pushing the thief so that one of them could start handcuffing him. Thank you very much for your help, Hero Deku, another officer deeply thanked, bowing in profound admiration for the symbol of hope traveling around the world, helping others. There's nothing to thank me for, just passing by, the humble hero replied before his attention shifted to the civilians watching behind the guard's perimeter. Deku, we love you, exclaimed one of the many excited girls, raising her hands. We missed you, shouted a young fan of the great Japanese hero who saved countless people and defeated hundreds of villains abroad. Don't leave again, pleaded another, wanting Deku to stay in the country with all of them, acclaiming him as their number one. You're amazing, Deku, exclaimed another civilian, filled with admiration and awe for their favorite hero. Love your new style, squealed a female fan, ranging from teenagers to women smitten by the tall, strong, and attractive man. Izuku was happy seeing the genuine excitement in his fans' eyes. He stood to observe them all, waving his hand. Thanks, everyone, for your support. Please take care of each other and have happy holidays. I love you all too, he responded with that deadly weapon, the radiant and dazzling smile that caused silence to reign for a few seconds. We love you too, Deku. Everyone shouted even more excitedly than before, with tears in their eyes, taking even more photos of Deku, the hero almost resembling the great All Might but being his own gentle and humble person, his own hopeful and incorruptible symbol, more than enough to be admired worldwide. Due to the growing excitement of the spectators wanting to get closer to Izuku, the officers and guards had to reinforce their ranks to withstand the weight of Deku's fans' love. Although they themselves also wanted to approach to ask for photos and autographs, but they were working. Don't worry, Mr. Deku, we'll handle this, the chief officer told the tall man, who smiled and thanked them for their good work as he left with the criminal escorted by two more officers. Midoriya, Izuku's attention turned to the person calling him from behind. When he turned around, he found Ryuko, who seemed to shrink when he focused on her. How did she get there? Well, she just had to introduce herself to the officers, who recognized her as the hero Ryukyu and let her pass. The truly challenging part was navigating through that sea of fans, some of whom looked like they were about to have a heart attack from happiness. After struggling and maneuvering through so many people, she now stood here, with her weak legs melting and her heart beating a mile a minute. Her calm and composure collapsed when those beautiful green orbs met her eyes. The same green orbs that looked at her with such intensity and passion that night when he spoke those words. They haven't spoken in years. Will he be distant with her? Will he be upset about what happened? Would he even recognize her in the first place? After all, her hair had grown to shoulder length since he left, and only a few of her school friends barely recognized her after so long without seeing her. How could he? Oh, Tatsuma-san, it's good to see you again, he greeted her with a cheerful smile that effortlessly disarmed all her worries, while igniting a pleasant warmth in her chest. He truly recognized her. You've returned, she said, a bit uncertain because she can barely believe it, even with him right in front of her. He smiled playfully. Yep, here I am, he said, pointing to himself with a thumb, mimicking a phrase he inherited from his mentor and now uses as his own after becoming a pro-hero. She seemed uneasy, a faint blush on her cheeks. When you? She asked, looking up at him without finishing the question, but it was clear to the freckled man. Yesterday, I came to spend Christmas with my mom and thought about inviting my friends from UA on the 31st to spend New Year together, Izuku replied calmly as he bent down to pick up his cap that had fallen during the struggle with the thief. The woman deflated as she lowered her gaze. Won't you stay? She didn't really want to hear the answer, truly. He shook his head slowly. No, I'll leave in early January, I still have a lot to do outside, replied the green-haired man, straightening up with a small smile. She felt her chest tighten with bitterness but did her best not to show it outwardly. Instead, she turned to him with a small, sad smile. It seems you've become a busier man, she tried to chat casually, but her voice betrayed her. How pitiful did she appear? It's inevitable, there's a lot of crime outside that I can't ignore, Izuku said cheerfully, with one hand behind his head. After that, an awkward silence settled between them. Ryuko genuinely wanted to slap herself right there to shake off that mood and force herself to interact with Deku as the adult she's supposed to be. However, she couldn't make a scene in front of him. Also, there's that sharp issue that has been pulsating in a corner of her mind, demanding to be addressed and finally resolved after so many nights of regret in the solitude of her room. She made an effort to gather the courage to lift her head and look him directly in the eyes. It's now or never, she must clarify things with him so that their already ruined relationship can return to what it was before that night. Regarding what happened that time, She kept her fragile gaze on those kind green eyes despite the difficulty. After too many months, she was finally trying to apologize for the way she acted and said some things that summer morning. But her attempt was abruptly cut off. I don't know what you're talking about, Tatsuma-san, Izuku said, smiling kindly with closed eyes, stopping her before she could continue with what she was going to say. And even as frustrated and discouraged as she was after her failure, she understood why he stopped her. Because she herself said that they should never mention what happened between them that night again. Hey, kid, stop. The voice of a guard caught the attention of both adults, who noticed how a small child had passed under the guard's defenses to stop the fans, worrying his mother who called him back. But the child couldn't hear her as he was already in front of Deku. Ryuko smiled a bit touched when she saw the bright eyes of the little boy in a white cape who admired the hero's great figure that he was trying to imitate just minutes ago. Hello, little friend, Izuku greeted the dark-haired and tousled-haired child after a few seconds. Deku. Could you give me an autograph? The little one nervously asked, closing his eyes and squeezing his hands in front. Sure, where? Izuku asked with the same softness and calmness in his voice, looking at the child who, after hearing him, became excited only to freeze moments later. Oh. I didn't bring anything, the little one visibly deflated, disappointed that he didn't have any Deku merchandise with him. He could ask him to sign his cape, but Deku's cape is purely white. It wouldn't be Deku's cape if it has a marker on it. Izuku smiled warmly, his pure green eyes fixed on the child. Don't worry, look, he drew the infant's attention as he took a marker from his coat and took off his cap to write his signature all over the front. Then he knelt down and offered it to the child. Here you go, keep it, the freckled man said kindly, giving his cap to the little one. The child's eyes lit up as he took the cap in his little hands, treating the signed cap like a sacred treasure or a legendary relic. Thank you so much. The excited little one thanked, spitting out a small flame from his mouth due to excitement before putting on the cap, which was a bit too big for him. Deku smiled satisfied before standing up again. Have a Merry Christmas, he wished the child with a thumbs up, receiving a vigorous nod from the excited child who ran back to his mother. Watching the child walk away, Izuku scratched his cheek with a finger. Looks like I'll have to cancel my shopping now that I've been discovered. I'll try to go to another place tomorrow to buy my mom's gift, he lamented with a small smile, as he had initially come for that purpose. Ryuko widened her eyes, seeing an opportunity. If you want, I can help you with that, Izuku turned to Ryuko, who now had a more natural smile on her face. I can guide you to a new shopping center a few blocks away and give you advice on what to gift, the generous blonde woman proposed, with a faint blush on her cheeks. After a few seconds, the green-haired man seemed more enthusiastic. That would be really helpful, I'd appreciate it, Tatsuma-san, he humbly accepted the proposal from the beautiful woman beside him. But I don't have anything to cover my identity. I don't want to attract too much attention, he said, a bit unsure of how to go unnoticed now that he had given his cap to the child and only had his dark sunglasses. Ryuko smiled playfully before taking off her black woolen hat and handing it to him. Here you go, she told the green-haired man, who for some reason stared at her dazed for a few seconds. Izuku shook his head before accepting the hat. Thanks, he said with a smile that both shared for a moment before Ryuko looked away a bit nervously. That went better than expected. And before they knew it, they were chatting in a family restaurant. She managed to take him incognito to the mentioned shopping center, and they spent the next hour browsing stores where she guided him in search of something he could give to his mother. At one point, they found a beautiful headband that Izuku liked, and he bought it. Instead of parting ways, they continued walking until they found themselves in this family-friendly establishment. Unexpectedly, She found herself talking naturally with him, and he didn't reject the freedom she took in talking to him. He responded with the same soft and gentle smile she remembered and missed. She's genuinely satisfied. Being able to talk this way with him, like they did so long ago, was something she didn't expect to experience again. Yet here she is, sitting with a hot chocolate by her side while on the other side of the table is Izuku, who ordered a coffee. She smiled, watching him still hiding his identity with the black hat that couldn't conceal his green curls in the front and the dark sunglasses. After all, he's Deku, one of the most famous heroes in the world currently. There's no way he could enter a family restaurant calmly without being swarmed by all the customers and staff who wanted to exchange words with him. And now, especially, after the word spread that Deku is in Japan, the hashtag Deku coming home trended within just 1 hour. Containing her amusement, there's still the fact that Izuku is incredibly handsome and attracts the attention of people around him, especially girls who easily mistake him for a male model. For example, she remembered how nervous Izuku was when high school girls approached him for a photo, but it turned out they hadn't discovered that he's Deku, which relieved him quite a bit, while she had to cover her mouth to hide her laughter. Anyway, it's good that they haven't been discovered, and they can continue catching up. They've been talking for a while now, and both have taken off their coats, leaving them aside. Izuku raised an eyebrow at what she had just said. Really? Yusajiyama-san and Kamihara-san? The green-haired man asked with mild surprise, receiving a nod from Ryuko. Yes, they started dating a couple of months ago. Both still behave the same, but I think that's how they show their love, she explained with a small smile, recalling the constant complaints of the ninja hero and the teasing from her rabbit friend. Well, I'm happy for them, the freckled man said, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose before holding the coffee in his hand to take a sip. Ryuko saw an opportunity to ask the question that has been lingering in her mind for a while, the one she didn't dare to ask for various reasons. And what about you? Is there someone waiting for you in America? She tried to ask as casually as possible, crossing her arms with a small smile. After saying that, she noticed a hint of bitterness in Deku's once jovial expression. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, she hurriedly added, hoping she hadn't touched on a sensitive point. He raised a hand to reassure her and with a small smile shook his head before looking her in the eyes. I haven't had much luck in love, but still, I work so that she notices me someday, he replied confidently, a more animated smile now directed only at her. She made a face and lowered her gaze a bit. So, there is someone, her whisper carried a tinge of sadness and bitterness that she quickly tried to ignore. By the way, you haven't lost contact with your UA classmates, right? She forced a smile, attempting to change the topic of conversation. I've only stayed in touch with a few, I've been very busy, Izuku replied, a bit embarrassed, scratching his cheek with a finger. Ryuko composed herself and spoke more calmly. So I guess you already know that Nehire is in 5th place, and Aravati and Froppy are in 8th and 9th. A hint of pride could be heard in the woman's voice, not going unnoticed by Izuku, who smiled amusedly, comparing her to a proud older sister boasting about her younger sisters. He nodded. Yes, I called them and congratulated them when I found out. They're quite successful, just like the others, the green-haired man said calmly before bringing a hand to his neck. I feel bad for still being in the top 10, even though I don't deserve it, he said embarrassed because despite not being in the country, he was still in the 10th position. That is unfair considering that there are many Japanese heroes who deserve that position more than him. Don't say that. Regardless of where you are, you help people. That alone is a great achievement, Ryuko scolded him severely, facing the man in front of her who constantly downplays his accomplishments and the influence he has had on the country even before leaving. Izuku cheered up a bit more by hearing her. I have a feeling I've said something like that before, he smiled at the yellow-eyed woman, who shrugged. Who knows, replied the dragon woman, pretending to be indifferent with a playful smile gracing her pink lips. Suddenly, the man's phone vibrated in his pocket, grabbing his attention. He took it out to check the notification on his screen and seconds later put it back in his pocket. It's my mother, she wants my help decorating the living room, Izuku calmly informed as he took his coat and stood up. He took out his wallet and left his share of the bill before putting it back. It was fun catching up with you, Tatsuma-san, but I have to go now, he said kindly to the still-sitting woman who nodded understandingly but still looked a bit down about his departure. I understand, but before you go, I have one last question, Ryuko said, looking at the table for a few seconds before lifting her gaze to those green orbs behind the black glasses. A knot formed in her throat, but she didn't let that stop her. Why did you leave? She finally asked the question that has been bothering her for so long. There was silence between them that felt eternal, and anxiety and nerves began to make their way. She was about to tell the green-haired man to ignore the question and leave. But the solemnity and at the same time the melancholy in Izuku's expression stopped her. Because I was too weak to accept rejection, those soft and bitter words came from his lips before he closed his eyes. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, Tatsuma-san. Deku bid farewell to the woman with a gentle smile and a soft tone, about to start his way to the exit, but not before taking off her hat and leaving it on the table. She only managed to hear a collective gasp from everyone present in the place, and then she felt a breeze by her side. When she turned around, Deku had already left a trail toward the door due to the speed at which he left, anticipating the reaction his fans would have upon seeing him. Alone at the table, ignoring the commotion caused by Deku's appearance, the dragon heroine placed a hand over her chest and squeezed it, a bitter grimace tarnishing her beautiful face. Did he leave? Because of her? It's curious how, by not being careful with her words, she brought herself to this point. How the conflict between her heart and mind made her say things that she would regret years later. And now she's here, sitting in her agency's office with a glass of wine in her hand, her unfocused gaze seeing the city through the window. She was supposed to review some routine documents typical of the new year, but at some point, she just stopped and began drowning her sorrows with the bottle of wine hidden under her desk. Why? Does it really matter? She was getting disheartened, and what better way to accompany her mood than with a good glass of wine? It's not the first time in the few days of the new year that she simply feels like doing nothing due to the immense emptiness she feels inside. It was really hard to pretend that she's completely fine when she's not, especially at the Christmas party her agency organized and on New Year's Eve, which she spent with her parents. Although she's almost sure that they saw through her, they didn't insist when they noticed she didn't want to talk about it. She thanked them because honestly, she wouldn't know how to tell them that she wishes to go back in time and correct what was a night of passion with the hero Deku, or to be more specific, what she said to him once they woke up the next morning. Her brow furrowed, and she took another sip of the purplish-red liquid that slid down her throat. She really was a coward. Knock, knock, she heard Nehira's voice from the other side of the door instead of an actual knock. Come in, Nehira, replied the hero without enthusiasm, giving the blue-haired girl the green light to open the door. A head peeked in, along with a great light blue mane. Hello, Ryu-chan, Nehira greeted with a gentle smile to the woman who was sitting behind her desk with a complicated expression and her blonde hair tied up in a ponytail. Hello, was Ryukyu's dry and brief response. She didn't even attempt to force a smile and instead brought the glass back to her lips. Nehira entered the office, closing the door behind her. What are you doing drinking at this hour? It's 8 a.m. Were you thirsty, and did your coffee maker break? She asked in a mix of innocent curiosity and concern. The dragon heroine remained silent, contemplating the space for a few seconds. I talked to Midoriya, she confessed, deciding to tell the blue-haired girl what was going on. Oh, you too? I was at his New Year's party. It was quite fun. How did it go for you? Nehira asked cheerfully, with a smile, approaching the desk, grateful to be able to ease the tension in the air with a more joyful topic. I think he hates me, but Ryuko's gloomy words only worsened the situation. Why do you think that? Nehira asked, a bit more concerned, looking at her since she knows Izuku and knows that he's not someone who usually harbors hatred toward others. She doesn't understand why Ryu-chan would think such a thing. The heroine, for the first time since she entered the office, looked Nehira in the eyes. Because I rejected his feelings a long time ago, Ryuko answered, deciding once and for all to talk about it, to tell Nehira what happened that time. The blue-haired woman stayed quiet for a while before calmly taking a seat in the chair in front of the desk. Tell me more, she said with a small smile to the woman, ready to patiently listen to everything she had to say. Over the last half hour, Ryuko poured her heart out to Nehira, who believed she had the right to know. She told her about encountering him during a patrol 2 months before the battle in Osaka and Tartarus's escape. Ryuko also shared how she went to the hospital to bring him flowers after the incident. Then, she reached the part where she confessed what they did that night after leaving the pub and what she told him the next morning, only to find out later on the hero billboard chart JP that he had gone abroad. This resulted in not seeing him for more than 2 years until a few weeks before Christmas. It was tough to let it all out, and she would have drunk more wine to cope, but Nehira took the bottle away. So, she had no choice but to continue while staying sober. So that happened, Nehira said unexpectedly calm, one hand supporting her chin in understanding. Aren't you upset? Ryuko asked, a bit surprised, looking at the blue-haired woman who, in turn, raised an eyebrow. Why would I be? Nehira asked back, tilting her head to the side with noticeable confusion. Ryuko looked away a bit and timidly glanced at her. Because he and I did. That, she emphasized the last part, trying to make the blue-haired woman understand what she was talking about. Nehire looked at her curiously and took a few seconds to connect the dots, then opened her eyes in realization while hitting her palm with a fist. Then, Hiro Nehire-chan looked into her eyes. I don't like Deku-kun. I see him as a younger brother, a little brother who took care of me like an older one, she clarified, smiling and making a peace sign with one hand. Ryuko's eyes widened, and something inside her chest seemed to lighten as relief flooded over her. Really? The dragon woman asked, perplexed, looking at Nehire, who nodded in response. Of course, although there was a time when I was in love with him, but that's water under the bridge, the blue-haired woman said calmly, with a hint of melancholy in her expression that didn't go unnoticed by Ryukyu. What happened? The blonde asked, concerned and interested in equal parts about what happened to her little sister's feelings for Deku. Nehire then lifted her head with a slight smile and looked her in the eyes. When we started living together, he showed me the autograph you gave him a couple of times. He asked about you sometimes and talked about how admirable and fabulous you are as a hero when I mentioned you. His expression would light up whenever he mentioned you. How insensitive of him, right? The playful hero asked rhetorically, not expecting a response from Ryukyu, who had her eyes quite wide. Is she not saying that? The blue-haired woman continued. Even so, I really liked Deku-kun and tried to make him feel the same, she said with a touch of sad longing before her smile widened again. But living with him for so many months made me realize that he didn't have eyes for me at that time. He was only seeing you, Nehire revealed with affection to Ryukyu, whose eyes opened even wider as warmth rushed to her cheeks. I like you, Ryuko-san. She remembered those words, those gentle but resolute words that escaped his lips that night as he looked directly at her with those intense, large green eyes. She heard her being roar from within, flames of intense frustration as well as happiness, surprisingly feeling liberated from constraints she barely remembered having after burying this feeling in the depths of her heart for so long. I'm truly an idiot, she lamented with visible anger, restraining the urge to hit her desk with a fist, regretting the mistake she made that time. Don't say that, Ryu-chan, even you can make mistakes, Nehire told her with a reassuring and sweet smile to ease up on herself. Ryukyu found her own resolution and, with a determined look, stood up with her hands planted on the wood. Do you know when he's leaving for America again? She asked the blue-haired woman, who is constantly in contact with the green-haired guy and would know about it. She needs to see him immediately, needs to talk to him before it's too late again. Nehire? She worriedly inquired, seeing Nehire's troubled expression, who didn't respond for a few seconds before checking the time on her phone. In 20 minutes, the blue-haired woman replied, concerned that Ryu-chan would be disheartened to hear that Deku-kun would be leaving for America again in less than half an hour, and she wouldn't be able to catch him. Contrary to expectations, the determination on the dragon heroine's face hardened, and with a small smile, she asked, where? Determined not to make the same mistake of letting him go without resolving things first. Nehire felt genuinely happy to see Ryu-chan so alive again, as motivated and determined as when she was ready to risk her life for the well-being of others. If she showed that expression in this situation, then she could really entrust Ryu-chan with taking care of him. At Kobe Airport, Nehire told the woman, who for a moment immersed herself in her thoughts. Her agency is far from Kobe, reaching there in just 20 minutes would be a real miracle. But Deku covered the same distance from Osaka to Tartarus in that time. If he, being human, could do it, how could a dragon not? I have to go, she declared firmly and resolutely, quickly heading towards the door, opening it, and about to run to the rooftop to transform. Ryu-chan, but she stopped in the doorway, turning to look over her shoulder at Nehire, who smiled widely with a thumbs up. Make sure he stays. Upon hearing those words, Ryukyu could do nothing but smile and head towards what would be the toughest race against time in her life. In the blue sky, a blur crossed the space, leaving a trail against the wind. Flying through the air at great speed, the strong sound of the flapping of two large wings could even be heard from the ground. The cause was none other than the great dragon soaring through the skies at high speed, distorting the clouds with each powerful flap, causing air currents that pushed her more forcefully toward her destination. Ryukyu clenched her teeth as she exerted her strength on her wings to fly even faster than she was currently going. Faster! 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 She demanded fiercely, squeezing every drop of energy to increase her speed and thus reduce the distance between her and Kobe Airport. She must reduce the distance separating him from her. She has to arrive on time, has to catch him and tell him what she has been keeping to herself for a long time. She has to talk to Izuku before it's too late. I like you, Ryuko-san. He confessed to her that night, was honest about his feelings toward her, and she practically rejected him. It was just a mistake, so there's no reason to dwell on what we both said. She was insensitive, a true coward wanting to escape from it, hiding behind the excuse that she would be betraying Nahire's trust. It was never like that, she was just afraid of truly connecting with someone she understood, someone who inspired her and earned her respect and affection. All this time, she was afraid that if she had said what she felt, she would have eventually ruined it. She was afraid to open her heart, to leave her daily routine, and finally give the young knight who entered her life a chance, slowly conquering her. And since that day, she has had to pay for her mistake, one she will remedy today. She has to do it. I have to get there, she shouted, increasing the strength with each flap until her wings hurt from the power of each push. Despite her high speed, she identified the Rocco Mountains and the Great Akashi Strait Bridge. At least, she was in Kobe. Checking a digital clock, she noticed the time. Not much time left. With even more strength than before, she propelled herself forward, creating a gust of wind behind her. She exerted herself, pushed herself harder than ever before. Her arms ached, and her stamina was dwindling, but she didn't stop and flew with all her might. Soon, she saw Kobe Airport on the artificial island off the coast. She began descending without slowing down until forced to land at the entrance. She opened her wings, slowing her momentum to avoid hurting anyone, and hurried to plant her feet on the ground. "It's Ryukyu," exclaimed an excited civilian, pointing at the famous dragon heroine. People began to approach her as she returned to her human form. Ignoring them for the sake of her goal, she evaded them, running quickly to the gates and entering the building directly to the reception, 10 meters away. She needed information about the terminal for the flight to America and to stop Deku before he boarded the plane. With that in mind, she ran, still tired from her flight, putting strength in her legs she didn't know she had. Security guards asked her to stop, but she ignored them. Even if fined, she'd deal with that after talking to Deku. Because right now, she has to find him. Right now, she must confess her feelings. Right now, her top priority is to find Izuku and confess what she has felt for so long, to tell him what she held back that day. That she likes him too. "Excuse me, Miss Ryukyu, but the Flight 4XX to New York left an hour ago due to an airline schedule adjustment," the receptionist's words shattered her thoughts. She stood there, frozen, with wide open eyes, while people around her looked at her strangely for her abrupt arrival. But she didn't care anymore. She simply had no words, no optimistic thoughts, no hope. Everything was destroyed in just a few seconds when the receptionist formulated that response. She failed. She didn't make it on time, she didn't even have the chance to stop him in the first place. He left while she was lamenting, drinking wine in her office. Without strength, she gave in and fell to the ground, physically and mentally exhausted. She just stayed there with her lifeless gaze fixed on the floor. Feeling the emptiness inside her and the loneliness eating at her, she waited for the tears to come, but they never did. Even crying seemed impossible. She felt so empty that even sadness was being swallowed and consumed to try to fill that deep hole in her heart. What a lamentable dragon heroine, isn't it? If only she had talked to him before. If only. Oh. The tears. They're finally coming. The midday sun illuminates the city, bathing her and its inhabitants in its light and warmth. Ryukyu walked among the crowded streets in her heroine costume, looking in different directions with a serious expression. 2 girls, no older than 16, followed her. It was another day of patrol, and this time, she was supervising her 2 interns from UA, whom she had accepted after seeing their performance in the last sports festival. One girl had short black hair and wore a medieval archer costume with a quiver and a mechanical bow on her back. She had a green hood with a camouflage design covering her head, along with a black mask over her brown eyes. The other girl, on the other hand, had curly pink hair falling over her shoulders. Her heroine costume consisted of a full-body black spandex suit with what looked like pink cotton clouds covering her wrists, ankles, knees, elbows, chest, and waist. Both girls seemed a bit uncomfortable with the attention, not because they were the ones drawing looks, aside from their costume designs, but because they were in the company of the famous dragon heroine Ryukyu, a veteran with many years of experience and a pro hero still in the top 10 of the country. The woman with blonde hair down to her elbows stopped and turned to look at them over her shoulder. "Make sure to keep your eyes wide open, you never know when or where a crime might happen," she calmly advised the aspiring heroes. "Understood, Ryukyu-san." Both girls responded a bit nervously, saluting in a military manner. Seeing them so tense, the woman smiled slightly. "Don't be too stiff, I know you might be a bit nervous, but remember that I'm here with you. You have nothing to fear, just be clear on what you need to do when required, she instructed in a gentle tone. Evacuate civilians away from the conflict zone, said the archer girl, and then her friend continued, and provide support from behind if the situation allows, completing the two main instructions the professional had given them since they started their internship at her agency. I'm glad you understand, Ryuko said, nodding before continuing her patrol, followed closely by the more relaxed interns. The archer nudged her friend with small elbows, signaling her to talk to the woman. However, the friend shook her head and instead pushed her to be closer to Ryukyu, who looked at her curiously. The young student felt a bit uneasy but spoke nonetheless. Is it true that Arabity, Froppy, and Nehire-chan worked in your agency? She nervously asked the heroine, who, according to various sources, had taken in 3 of the most famous heroines in the country before each of them created their own agency. Ryukyu smiled before nodding. Indeed, Hunter Girl, she responded, slightly happy and proud of those 3. Both girls seemed excited by her response, clasping their hands together in enthusiasm. We hope to be as famous as them too, exclaimed the pink-haired student with a big smile, her friend sharing the same excitement. If they work hard at the agency of the prestigious dragon heroine, they could also become very recognized. The woman with sharp, slanted blonde eyes furrowed her brow slightly. I think they're more admirable for their skills and expertise than for their popularity, sweetie, she said sternly, scaring the 2 teenagers a bit, who felt sorry for their outburst. All right, admitted the pink-haired aspiring hero, scratching her head a bit embarrassedly. Meanwhile, Hunter Girl looked at one of the screens on the buildings, and her eyes lit up. Deku did something amazing again, she exclaimed, pointing to the screen where the news was being broadcast. Sweetie exclaimed with amazement, lifting 2 cruise ships with 2,000 crew members over the sea and carrying them through the air to the nearest coast. That's astonishing. She had a surprised smile on her face as she read the news, with images of the incident displayed on the screen. Ryuko made a complicated expression as her eyes focused on it. The superhero was flying with her cape fluttering in the wind, holding the 2 immense cruise ships with the strength of her arms and a radiant smile. It touched Ryuko's usually quiet heart. It had been a month since she failed again to reconcile with Deku. Despite recovering from the initial depression, she still felt the open wound and the emptiness in her chest, as vivid as the day at the airport. I wonder when he'll be back, Hunter Girl commented with a smile, watching the symbol of hope once again save the day. If he does, I'd love to live abroad. There are so many places I'd like to explore, Sweetie said excitedly, opening her arms in the air and twirling on her heels, fantasizing about going beyond the borders of her country. You're right, the world is too big to stay here, Hunter Girl agreed, both unaware that their conversation had affected Ryuko to some extent, who sighed to herself. Don't get distracted, remember we're still patrolling, she told the 2 girls with a hint of severity, prompting them to react instantly. Understood, Ryukyu-san. They responded with military salutes, this time less intimidated and somewhat excited, as if they were encouraged by the idea that their current and future efforts to become great heroines could lead them down the same path Deku took in exploring the world. She wanted to scold them for being so naive, but she couldn't find a way to do it when they seemed so motivated to follow that path. The life of a hero is not easy, it has more lows than highs, and there are moments when one questions if they truly deserve the title. However, they would have to experience those things for themselves when the time comes. For now, she led them back on the practice route she prepared for them to get used to the patrolling they would do quite frequently from now on. After a few hours, Ryuko found herself alone in the women's dressing room of her agency. She had just taken off her costume and changed into civilian clothes. The patrol with her interns had nothing really notable beyond giving them some advice based on her experience. With enough time for the day, she sent them both home, and after changing, she was ready to go home and rest after another day of work. However, the dragon woman seemed lost in her thoughts, melancholically putting on a dark jacket. She needed to make a rule from now on that those girls stopped mentioning Deku every 5 minutes. It wasn't healthy for her, still struggling to bear the overwhelming weight of her feelings. She remembered how, after sobbing on the ground for several minutes that day, she had almost bought a ticket for the next flight to America. However, she reluctantly stopped herself, she couldn't just leave. She was a Japanese pro-hero in the top 10 who had to answer to the hero committee in the government, who might or might not give their consent for her to travel. Not to mention that she couldn't just leave without making prior arrangements for her agency during her absence. Either way, it would be pointless to go look for him in NY. What would she say? That she likes him and hopes he forgives her for rejecting him abruptly over 2 years ago? It's ridiculous, she can't expect him to easily forget how hurt he felt and forgive her as if nothing happened. With that in mind, she sadly resigned herself to accept her inevitable failure and has since been striving in her work and dangerous life to distract her mind. Her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She took it out and checked the message she received. It was a message from Nehire. "Come quickly to this address." That's all it said, along with an address. Her instincts, honed over years in this profession, signaled something dangerous. Perhaps her little sister had been kidnapped and was asking for help by sending her location. Her sharp eyes narrowed, and she hurried out of the dressing room. She would have to take a train to reach the location in at least 10 minutes. She couldn't risk going in her dragon form. Villains might harm Nehire as their hostage. As she ran, an intense anger reflected in her sharp eyes. If she found that her dear little sister had been hurt upon arrival, those damn villains would regret it, big time. They don't want to mess with a dragon. It took her a bit to get to the location due to a train delay, but she finally stood in front of what seemed to be a traditional Japanese complex surrounded by walls, behind which was a garden and the main building. It wasn't hard for her to be suspicious of this place. It wasn't really sinister or ugly, it was quite a beautiful Japanese house, at least from the outside. But she remembered that several criminal organizations often made their moves in places like this in the middle of a residential area. In a notable example, the Shihaseikai. She took a deep breath to control her urge to storm the place. She mustn't let her emotions blind her when Nehire's life could be in danger. First, reconnaissance is needed. She would approach the door, pretending to ask for directions or something similar. She would judge the threat level based on the person who answers. Then, depending on that threat level, she would call for reinforcements to organize a group assault, rescue Nehire, and then arrest the bastards who dared to harm her. With a sigh, she proceeded to move her feet towards the large wooden doors guarding the traditional complex behind them. Having done this countless times before, she rang the bell on the wall and adopted a gentle and calm expression to not arouse suspicions about her intentions. She patiently waited for over a minute, hoping to at least receive a response through the intercom. When she was about to ring again, a door suddenly opened. That's when everything slowed down. Time became slower until it simply stopped. Of all the people in the world, she never expected to see him. And yet, it might be an illusion, a trick of her mind and eyes trying to deceive her. Perhaps it's the effect of some illusory quirk. However, it's impossible that the man before her was not him. She recognizes him, every freckle on his cheeks, those unruly green curls, the intensity and shine behind those emerald eyes, his lavender scent, and that smile that began to form on his face when their eyes met. There is no doubt at all. No quirk could create an illusion that takes her breath away like only he can. Deku. And it was there, in that moment when they locked eyes, that she heard the beating of her heart. Ba dump ba dump ba dump. Her cheeks reddened, and finally, the accumulated surprise burst out. Midoriya? The woman exclaimed, perplexed and shocked, taking a few steps back with flushed cheeks. Her composed and calm expression from a few moments ago was thrown in the trash. The tall man with green hair is dressed in a dark yukata, a green obi, and a black haori over his shoulders, and he is none other than the symbol of hope, Deku, Izuku Midoriya, who was smiling happily to see the woman in front of him. Tatsuma-san, I'm glad you decided to come, said the green-haired one kindly, seemingly unsurprised to see her. Ryuko, on the other hand, is a different story. You? When? How? Why? I don't understand anything. I thought Nehire was in danger. The heroine was completely lost between intrigue and nerves, showing a facet of her that only emerges when the situation becomes too much for her and her steel nerves refined with experience. But at this moment, the dragon heroine's confusion can be understood a bit because why on earth is Deku here? And why on earth does he look so good in a yukata? She felt her face heating up as her gaze accidentally shifted towards the exposed chest of the handsome man in a yukata. Damn it, she can't think clearly like this. Izuku, oblivious to what's making her so nervous, took a few steps towards her, worsening her nerves. Didn't she say I invited you? He asked, raising a curious eyebrow, especially catching the attention of the woman who managed to calm down a bit. It didn't take him long to understand that Nehire sent the message and the address for her to meet him. She frowned as she looked away. I'm going to scold her for making me worry, Ryuko muttered, annoyed with her little sister, who was now embarrassing herself in front of Deku due to the misunderstanding. Be kind to her, it might not have been intentional, Izuku said with a slightly nervous smile and closed eyes, hoping Nehire wouldn't come crying, remembering past times when Ryukyu had been quite strict. Slightly irritated that he defended her, Ryuko coughed gently in an attempt to regain her composure. "What's this about?" she asked the man, gesturing with her hands towards the traditional residence behind him. Izuku didn't understand at first until he turned to look behind him. "Oh, this is my house," he answered, smiling slightly amused while scratching the back of his head. At first, the blonde was surprised, raising an eyebrow inquisitively. "You live here?" she questioned, a bit skeptical, not because he couldn't afford such a house, but it was hard for her to believe that he lived in such a normal area. Except for the quality and size of the complex, all the other houses in the area were quite common for the middle class. No one would expect the symbol of hope, famous worldwide as one of the greatest heroes, a professional with a substantial income, to be living in a humble traditional home. She sighed with a slight smile on her lips. With Deku, applying common sense was absurd. He was a humble person who didn't feel comfortable surrounded by luxuries or expensive things, something she liked about him. Izuku crossed his arms and turned to look at the complex. "I bought it before going to America. I had to finish my business there and formally reintegrate as a Japanese hero," he said with a small smile, turning to look at Ryuko, who gasped in surprise. "It took me longer than expected. They insisted a lot on me staying, but I'm finally back," he smiled, still happy with closed eyes. Ryuko looked away with her heart pounding, restraining the urge to show how much she was glad to hear the news. After a few seconds, she managed to calm herself before looking at him again. Didn't you say there's a lot of crime out there that you can't ignore?" she asked, recalling what he had said in that conversation they had at the family restaurant. "Regardless of where I live, I'll be helping as much as possible," he replied calmly, without a hint of doubt. Even living in NY, he spent most of his time traveling from one country to another. Wherever he was, he would be Deku, a hero saving those in need with a smile. Ryukyu remained silent for a few seconds. "When did you arrive?" she asked timidly, looking up to meet his eyes. "I arrived 3 days ago, but I just finished moving in yesterday. Only my mother and Nahir know I'm here," the green-haired man replied calmly, looking at the beautiful woman in front of him, whose hair, even in a tied-up state, seemed a bit longer than he remembered from the last time they saw each other. "Is it okay if I know too?" Ryuko asked with a faint blush, adjusting herself on her white cheeks while playing with her fingers. Izuku scratched his cheek with a finger. "It doesn't have to be a secret. I'll be returning to work soon, and my arrival will be made public. I just wanted to talk to you before anything else," he said with a gentle smile that disarmed any attempt by her heart to calm down. Izuku walked towards the wooden door and pushed it open a bit. "Do you want to come in?" he kindly offered to the dragon woman, who awkwardly nodded before approaching timidly. "The permission," her voice betrayed her, embarrassing her more before she passed through the wooden doors and entered the garden of the Japanese complex. She heard the sliding door close behind her when Izuku entered the building once she was already inside. Politely, she took off her shoes and placed them in the entrance genkan, exchanging them for comfortable suripas nearby. Izuku, on the other hand, already had dark wooden getas on, and he moved forward to guide her through the corridors of the humble Japanese house. They soon reached the living room. "Nice place," she commented with a small smile. The clean walls and floors were impeccable. The few pieces of furniture in the room created a good atmosphere with the traditional air of the building, while the sofa and the TV on the wall were modern touches identifying the place as a mix of old and new. "I'm not used to the traditional design, but I like it," Izuku responded, smiling a little embarrassed as he scratched his head. He only bought this house because Todoroki-kun told him it's more relaxing than a Western one, and he was right. "Tea or coffee?" he asked courteously to Ryuko, who modestly took a seat on the sofa. "I'm okay like this, thank you," she declined the offer with a gentle smile before falling silent for a few seconds. "What did you want to talk to me about?" the woman asked a bit more formally, hiding her unease under a false calm because she still wonders what he wanted to tell her to the point of inviting her to his house. The green-haired man's expression became solemn, and with a more serious air, he took a seat on the chair on the other side of the small table that separated him from Ryukyu. He looked deeply into her eyes for a minute, during which neither of them spoke, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. "I owe you a big apology, Tatsuma-san," Izuku said with a firm look before nodding towards the confused woman. "Why?" she asked, a bit uneasy seeing him bowing his head. As far as she knows, he hasn't done anything wrong to apologize for. Deku then raised his head and looked her in the eyes. "For running away from you years ago," the moment he said those words, Ryuko made a sad face, confirming her suspicions. He had really left because of her. He lowered his gaze a bit. "I know you were right, that what we did that night was a mistake and shouldn't have happened. But for me, It was special to be with you, and I thought my feelings were reciprocated. The next morning, when I sadly realized it wasn't the case, I felt shattered, he said with a sad smile that broke Ryuko's heart. I wasn't strong enough to overcome that. That's one of the reasons I decided to leave. Maybe that way, I could forget that pain and move on, he said, looking at one of his hands melancholically. Before Ryuko could say anything, his demeanor brightened a bit as his smile became more genuine. I met new people, experienced new cultures, and made many new friends. Leaving Japan helped me a lot to improve as a hero and as a person. Although I missed my family and friends here in Japan. There wasn't a day when I thought I made a mistake, the man recounted with growing enthusiasm reflected in the sparkle in his clear green eyes. He lived through both good and bad moments, and looking back, there was no way everything he experienced would change him for anything. Ryuko looked a bit subdued as she looked at her lap. So you're saying that leaving because of me was the best thing that happened to you? I deserve it. I was insensitive to you. I'm really sorry, the woman said, trying to fight against the bitter pain in her chest. Because she understands. She was the one who asked to ignore what happened that night, rejected his honest feelings, and, to top it off, didn't have the courage to fix things before he left the country, twice. She doesn't blame him for thinking that leaving the country was the best thing that could happen to him, that getting away from her made him happy. That's not what I'm trying to say, Tatsuma-san. She opened her eyes when she felt Izuku's strong hands holding her shoulders, pulling her out of the descending spiral of negativity. Then she looked into his eyes, those gentle and warm eyes that worriedly observed her and lightened the burden on her soul. He loosened his hands on her shoulders. What I really want to tell you is, thank you, he said with an affectionate smile that left her breathless. Because of you, I went abroad and had the chance to become much stronger, learn from different people, make new friendships. Though it wasn't your intention, you gave me more reasons to make this world a better place. Then he took one of Ryuko's hands and surrounded it with his own. So thank you. You've truly helped me a lot, Tatsuma-san, he thanked with total honesty, smiling in a way only he could, radiating a warmth that could melt any heart. But it's not easy to melt the cold in the vacant heart of a dragon that has been drowning in guilt and remorse for years. Ryuko lowered her head, feeling unworthy to look him in the eyes. I don't deserve any of your kind words, Midoriya, not after lying to you and to myself, she said, distressed, with her free hand clenched into a fist and tucked against her chest. What are you talking about? Deku asked the woman, concerned, not understanding why she was punishing herself. I like you, Midoriya, was her response while her eyes were hidden under the shadow of her hair. I don't even know when I started thinking about you this way or if I've really been feeling this for you all this time. I just know that I love you too much. Her voice became more fragile with each passing second as her body trembled with emotions on the surface. But how? How could her words be taken seriously after her mistakes? It wasn't right for me to say that it was a mistake, because I really enjoyed being with you that night. I was genuinely happy with your confession, and I felt pleased knowing that you thought of me that way. But it seems I'm not honest when I'm sober, and I tried to deny it. I tried to act like nothing happened because I was unable to accept something so simple. She refused to stop, each time with a more broken tone until she finally raised her head. Tears streamed from the edge of her beautiful slanted eyes as she forced every bit of herself to say it at once. What she denied feeling, what she tried to escape, what she had to face and accept. What she could never tell him before, she had to release it at once. Her mouth curved upward. I truly fell in love with Izuku Midoriya, she confessed after so long, and in that instant, she felt her body shudder, not of her own will, but because of the warm and gentle contact of Deku's lips on hers. She could feel it, all the doubts, regrets, guilt, sadness, regrets, sorrow, and frustration, everything was purified by the affectionate meeting of their mouths, which she responded to with all the feelings she had been suppressing for so long. Who knows how long they stayed like this, seconds, minutes, hours? They really didn't know. Time became something so inconsequential for them that they simply ignored it. They lost and regained their breath only to meet again, desperate for oxygen as well as to prolong the kiss as much as they could. In the end, they finally gave in, their bodies couldn't take it anymore, and they were forced to distance their faces. Izuku was captivated by the beauty of the woman in his arms, slightly disheveled with her eyes a little blurred while a sensual blush accompanied her cheeks in tune with her erratic breathing. How long had he waited for this moment? How much effort did he have to make to escape the clutches of death with the intense longing that maybe one day his feelings would reach her? And today, somehow, it happened. She said it, not just with words but also through that kiss. She really likes him. Unable to help it, he smiled, and moments later, he observed the same smile forming on the beautiful face of the woman in front of him. They remained silent in the tranquility of the room, affectionately looking into each other's eyes without looking away, as if they couldn't believe that what was happening was real, as if it were a dream that would end as soon as they looked away. Deku reached a hand to wipe away Ryuko's tears with his thumb. Nehire told me you looked for me at the airport, the man commented softly, happiness filtering into his voice. Ryuko didn't reject the sweet gesture and allowed herself to be pampered. Yes, I arrived an hour late, and I got scolded for entering so abruptly. It was a horrible day, to be honest, she confessed with a small smile, unaffected by the bad memory, not now that he's here. The green-haired man finished wiping her tears, and both, still embraced, leaned back on the sofa, rejecting the idea of separating now that, after so long, they finally have each other. Do you know what was my other reason for going abroad? He asked with a smile, looking at the ceiling, catching the blonde's attention. To become better. I wanted to become a man you'd turn to see and give a chance to invite you on a date, a man you'd allow to court you properly, not just relying on luck and alcohol. He said the last part a bit playfully before his eyes met hers again. She blushed slightly and moved a bit closer to him. And how did it go? Ryuko asked playfully, lying down on top of him. He smiled with a hint of mischief. Tell me, do you think you could give this fool a chance to invite you to dinner? He asked, playing the same game as her while their faces closed the distance between them. I warn you, I'm not very good with alcohol, said the famous dragon heroine, sitting astride him. I can imagine, replied the admired symbol of hope as his hands encircled her waist to pull her closer to him. Their mouths slowly approached, feeling each other's breaths, but the advance was stopped by Ryukyu, who placed a finger on Deku's lips. Another warning, she said with a satisfied smile, noticing a trace of adorable frustration on her lover's face. I'm all ears. He calmly looked into her eyes, enchanted as she proceeded to slip her hands into his yukata, seducing him with the touch of her soft hands that caressed some of his scars. Perhaps I'm a bit jealous, she warned, slowly shortening the distance between her and the younger man's lips. I imagine that, Izuku chuckled to Ryuko's confusion, who raised an eyebrow. Why? The intrigued woman asked, not expecting him to be the one who would again snatch another passionate kiss, one to which she was already responding until Deku finished it seconds later, leaving her wanting more. It was then that Izuku smiled widely as he closed his eyes. Dragons are very territorial, aren't they? The freckled man playfully reminded her of her words from when they were at the pub. Ryuko, who felt the heat rise to her cheeks in embarrassment, took a few seconds to release a sweet and melodious laugh for the enjoyment of the green-haired man who loves to see her like this. Have you become bolder, or is it my imagination? She asked, smiling playfully while wrapping her arms around his neck and resting her forehead against his. Just bold enough to bring a smile to your face, he replied with the same humor as the woman before they closed their eyes and shared a gentle laugh. How long did they have to wait to get to this point? No, actually, the question is different. Does it matter? What matters is that they are together now, and this is just the beginning of their adventure, their own odyssey. Being a symbol's job has always been tough. He could really understand now the weight All Might had to carry on his shoulders. In his case, it was even worse considering the amount of trust placed by everyone in their invincible symbol of hope. Of course, he doesn't complain about his job, he loves what he does. Saving people has always been his dream and his greatest pleasure. Well, at least that was his greatest pleasure. Since he and Ryuko got married years ago, he has been discovering that there is a different kind of happiness and satisfaction that overshadow everything he has ever felt in his life. Touching down on the ground in front of their house, he allowed himself to sigh in relief as he loosened his tie a bit. Dealing with the Prime Minister and other presidents from different powers at the meeting where they planned an intercontinental tournament between the world's best hero schools was truly exhausting. Luckily, Kachan reached his patience limit, and with his unique temperament, he made them stop for today and continue another day. Thanks, Kachan. Now with the rest of the day off, he could go back home where he could finally relax in the peace of his home. The man slid the sliding door of his house and entered. I'm home. He announced his arrival, as Deku usually does. He took off his shoes and replaced them with his personal saripas, which are the biggest. With his new shoes on, he walked out of the Genkan and down the hallway to the living room, where suddenly he was tackled by a small body that managed to unbalance him a bit. Dad, exclaimed an excited 6-year-old with a big smile. He had curly yellow hair and green eyes, and small dragon-like wings on his back that fluttered happily in sync with the emotions of the little one who started climbing on his father's torso. Arf arf. From the hallway where the child came flying, there were small barks from a Shiba Inu puppy that wagged its tail happily and scampered between the feet of the symbol of hope, who smiled amused. Hee, calm down, Shu, I'm home now, Izuku told his son with a smile, wrapping his arms around him to lift him. You took a long time to come, complained the adorable blonde child, pouting and shaking his arms while the puppy continued barking happily, scratching Izuku's pants. I left this morning, son. I had work to do, the father replied with a wide paternal smile before tousling his son's hair, who forgot his anger enjoying being spoiled. But now that I'm here, we're going to have fun, right? Izuku asked the green-eyed child, just like his own. Of course. Shu replied excitedly, opening his arms while the wings on his back shook more, and the little dog showed more energy at the surge of the child's happiness. Pleased with his son's joy, Izuku bent down to pet the puppy that Poki had, a gift from Kirishima-kun and Ashido-san 4 months ago as a present for their newest family member. The green-haired man stood tall after pampering little Inugo, a name Shu came up with since the puppy is the 5th dog Poki had at the home of his manly red-haired friend. And your mom? Izuku asked his son curiously, who pointed in the direction of his parents' room. She's trying to put Kanade to sleep, the blonde child replied with a smile. Let's join them, the father suggested, receiving a nod from the little one, and with him in his arms, he headed towards their room, followed by the adorable Inugo wagging his tail happily. On the way, both Izuku and Shu took a deep breath as they passed by the spacious yard of their home, inhaling the fresh air before exhaling heavily. Why did they do this? The idea came from Ryukyu, who claimed to have seen Shu spitting green rays when he yawned, so this became an exercise to help their son learn to control his breath naturally. Izuku turned a corner and found himself a few meters from the door at the end of the hallway, which was slightly ajar. Carefully, he approached without making much noise and gently pushed the door to enter. There he saw her, the most beautiful woman in the whole world, lying in bed with a little baby covered and snuggled against her chest. Ever since Shu was born, Ryukyu retired as a pro-hero, despite repeated pleas from Izuku that she didn't have to do that and they could raise him while both being professionals. However, she was stubborn, and as usual, she won the argument. In these years, she let her hair grow, cascading down to the middle of her back, giving her a more maternal and mature vibe that frankly drives him crazy. Evidence of this was the little baby Kanade in her mother's arms. And he smiled from the soul. There are his favorite girls, his beautiful wife, and his adorable daughter. Welcome, dear, Ryukyu greeted with a gentle and soft smile once she saw her husband entering the room. I'm home, sweetheart, Izuku responded with the same affection in his voice, walking towards the bed with Shu in his arms and sitting on the edge next to where his wife lay. A warm and comforting feeling swept through his body as he saw the second product of his love with his beloved Ryukyu. A chubby baby with yellow eyes and green locks on her head, aside from having reptilian slit pupils like her mother. His little 4-month-old Kanade, the cutest baby in the whole wide world, and his dear daughter, who grumbled restlessly in her mother's arms. Our little one doesn't want to sleep, Ryukyu said affectionately to her husband, rocking the sweet baby trying to calm her. That's a problem, we don't want her to get cranky later, Izuku opined, unable to wipe the smile off his face while looking at his baby. What should we do, Shu? He turned to his eldest son for an idea. The little one took a few seconds to think until he came up with something. Give her your finger, Dad, Shu proposed with a big smile, looking at his father. That worked pretty well when Shu was a baby, Ryukyu agreed with a smile, looking at her husband, who had no objections to giving it a try. With a paternal and warm expression, the family father brought his left hand to the girl's face. Kanade, where's Daddy's little one? He asked lovingly, shaking his index finger in front of the baby's face. After a few seconds of wriggling, Kanade noticed the big finger moving in circles on her face, her restlessness stopped, and with adorable babbling, she began to try to grab it using her little hands, which couldn't quite catch it. Izuku smiled increasingly, filled with indescribable happiness while playing with his girl. He gently pressed her tiny nose, eliciting a melodious laugh from the baby who was trying to catch her father's finger. She's as beautiful as her mother, Izuku commented, turning to look at Ryukyu with a broad smile. Dear, you won't get more from me with compliments, she replied with a soft smile, rejecting any seduction from her husband to have another baby. At least not so soon. Deku smiled amusingly and turned to his son. Shu, you know what you have to do, right? He asked the boy, who immediately nodded. I'm going to defend Kanade as her big brother. Shu replied cheerfully, punching the air, motivated by the super special task his father has entrusted him with daily since his little sister was born. Exactly, while I'm not around, it's up to you to protect the princess inside the castle, Izuku proudly declared to his son, while a amused Ryukyu rolled her eyes. But mom is much stronger than me, the blond boy commented, with a finger on his chin, looking confused at his father. Izuku discreetly approached his son. That's precisely why we also need to avoid angering the dragoness who guards her treasure with jealousy, he whispered with a smile, only to be pinched on the cheek by Ryuko. I'm sorry, just kidding, said the country's #1 hero to his wife, who finally let him go after a while. Setting aside her husband's antics, who was now rubbing his cheek, she softened her expression, and her lips curved into a smile. Although it's true that my beautiful family is my most precious treasure, I will protect it, assured Ryukyu, the dragon hero and now the fierce beast who would protect those she loves. Shu looked at his mother with a gleam in his eyes. Mom is quite reliable and cool, said the green-eyed blonde in awe, looking at his mother, who smiled playfully with a hand over her mouth. Right? That's why I married her, Izuku happily told his son, who looked at his father as if he were even more incredible. The three of us together will prevent Kanade from having a boyfriend, declared the happy family father, counting on his family's support for such a task in the future. You're exaggerating again, dear. The way Ryuko said those words with that innocent and angelic smile sent a shiver down the strongest man on Earth's spine. Then it will just be Shu and me, the man whispered discreetly to his son, who was no longer paying attention and instead had his focus on his little sister. She fell asleep, said Shu, causing both parents to gaze at Kanade, who had already caught Izuku's finger and was now sleeping while still holding onto it. A pleasant and satisfying silence filled the room. Both parents looked tenderly as their little daughter slept peacefully while their son looked at her with a mix of interest and excitement, seeing her as a possible playmate and his assistant to defend the castle when dad isn't around. She's so small, commented Izuku, still unable to believe that he and Ryuko have created something so beautiful, so small and fragile, yet so wonderful. The same feeling he had when he held Shu in his arms for the first time, genuinely afraid to feel that weightlessness and realize how fragile life is in his arms. Yet here he is, with another addition to the family that he would protect and make happy with his life. You're too big too, Dad, Shu innocently told his father, eliciting a small and beautiful laugh from Ryuko. The mother of long, blonde hair discreetly covered her mouth with her hand. You're right, Shu, she said, agreeing with her little son, who had the same hair color but the same eyes as the man she fell in love with and married. At that moment, they looked into each other's eyes, mutually conveying so much with their gaze without the need for verbal communication. But still, there's no harm in hearing it directly from each other's mouths. The hero smiled from the depths of his heart. I love you, Ryuko, the man said with deep affection toward the woman who selfishly conquered his heart without even realizing it. And I love you, Izuku, responded the dragon woman with the same magnitude of affection, and then both united their lips in a chaste kiss that conveyed what they feel for each other. And so, a young hero managed to conquer the dragoness, and the dragoness conquered the heart of the young hero. But the odyssey of the pair would not end here. This is just another chapter in their story together, where new adversities will be planted in their path. That's why the hero and the dragoness would have to conquer the future that awaits them with their children. Together.